All right. Hi, guys. This is Ronnie Fernandez, LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. And I'm here with Lulu. Me and Lulu met, oh man, maybe a couple of years ago. I was starting a mentoring program, and she really helped me guide through that process. And we ended up talking a couple of months ago, and she just shared me her incredible story. And I was like, man, I don't really interview as usually just men, but I was like, this is just incredible. And I feel that it's just a great story that needs to be said. So, um, you're actually our first female. So welcome. Lulu, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, first female, so that's a huge honor.
Yeah.
Uh, so my name is Oralia Catalan, but I go by Lulu because I'm more comfortable with Lulu. But I will start at the very beginning of life. I feel like my life has been full of adversity. So I was born in Mexico, and I am the third of six kids, but I was accidentally born in Mexico. My mom was actually planning to come back to the US because I already had two siblings here. And I decided I couldn't wait any longer. And I was actually born a little earlier. I didn't even make it to the hospital. I was born in my grandparents' house.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I was born over there. I don't have because of that. It was like complicated because I couldn't get the proper documentation, and so that actually is why I feel like I've struggled so much because when I wanted to become an undergrad or go off to college, there was no legislation for students like me. There was no AB 540 legislation at the time. There was no DREAM Act. When I got to UCLA, they were calling me a foreign student, even though I grew up in the US. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so they were like, we don't know what to do with you. We don't know how to categorize you because your transcripts and everything else say you've been here, but technically you're out of state, but you're in California. And so even the financial aid office didn't know what to do with me. And I had spent my entire life here. I only had spent 6 months in Mexico from birth until 6 months, and I never had gone back.
oh, wow.
Yeah, so it started as a struggle. So I've overcome so much.
Yeah, let's get started because what were the story that you shared to me was pretty incredible. So when so you where did you grow up in? Let's start off there. What city did you grow up in? What part of California?
So I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in Napa Valley. So it's a predominantly Caucasian. There was no Latinos in my community. And in my elementary school, it was my brother and I, the only two Mexicans. And then when my brother moved on to middle school, it was my sister and I. So
Oh,
yeah, so there was no Latinos at the time. And there were field workers and things like that, but it was very seasonal. So because it was seasonal, the kids never got to enroll in school because they weren't there long enough to enroll. Um, Somehow we ended up there. So
wow. And how'd you do in school?
school was kind of my safe haven. And I say that because I grew up in a very like abusive household. My dad was actually an alcoholic, and he was in and out of jail. And so I did really well in school because it was kind of like my escape, and it was safe for me to be there. I looked forward to being in school. We were really, really, really poor also because, my mom was the only provider at home, and we were six kids. And so when my dad was around, it was another mouth to feed because he was so drunk all the time that he was taking money and, gambling it away or out in the bars and things like that. So it was even harder when he was around. So with school, my siblings and I would often like take home some of the lunch stuff that we had, like extra apples or extra milk just to make it through, and things like that. So it was difficult. I was actually having this conversation with my sister um, earlier this week, and we were talking about how we grew up so like low income, like poverty level, beyond poverty, and we're reflecting on our childhood and not having anything and wondering like why teachers never asked us like, are you okay, because we would wear the same clothes like every other day because my mom would wash it and then we'd wear it the next day and she'd wash it, and wear it the next day. One thing is my mom was really prideful. So we were always clean. She made sure that even though we had two outfits, she would wash it and then we'd wear it the next day. And so this is like in May, my sister and I would be wearing a sweater that said Happy Holidays. And we think about it now, and I'm wondering, like, why didn't our teachers say, like, hey, your sweater says Happy Holidays? Like, obviously something was going on, you know?
Yeah.
Or you didn't get new shoes, like, do you need something? And nobody asked. And this is a small town. There was like maybe 20 kids in my entire classroom. I went to the
Wow.
same elementary school from second grade all the way throughout to sixth grade. So people knew my family. You know, they knew that we weren't living okay. They knew we didn't have anything at home, but nobody reached out. Nobody asked like how they can support us, or do you have the resources, you know, at home, things like that. So one of the mottos that I live by, and you know, some of the things that you've helped me with is be the adult you needed when you were a kid. And
Right.
I have that in my office, that quote on a post-it. I wrote it when I was an undergrad and I was struggling, and remembering why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. And I still have it to this day. And now it's been decades and decades later. And I still have it and it's faded away, but I still remember that it says, like, be the adult that you needed when you were younger. And so every morning I greet my students and I make sure that I'm checking, you know, it's a rainy day and a kid shows up without a jacket. I ask them, like, what's going on? Why aren't you wearing a jacket? How can I help you? How can I support you? I go to the 99-cent store and I buy umbrellas for the kids, like anything to like carry them through, because I know that they're too embarrassed to ask. And at the time, I was too embarrassed to ask when I was in elementary school, you know, and I didn't know I could ask because I was always afraid of like social services taking me away from my family and being deported to Mexico, because it wasn't just like being taken away. It was I would be taken away and deported because I wasn't legally here. You know, my siblings were born here, so they'd have to stay, but I wouldn't be able to stay. You know, and my Spanish isn't great. I work, but my Spanish isn't great, and I don't know my family in Mexico, so it would have been tragic to be deported for me, you know, and so I wonder about that, like now to this day, like why didn't teachers reach out? Like why didn't they say like, hey, I noticed that you don't have very much clothes, or hey, you know, like with us and our students, we have like a clothing closet where the kids can pick up things without us even like asking or noticing or anything. They just go in there discreetly and pick it up. Um, and our location, like it's extremely wealthy. Like Napa Valley is extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
So for them to be able to provide resources would have been like nothing at all. But sometimes you choose not to see things, I think. So,
Wow. Yeah,
yeah.
that's so true. Yeah. And I guess I don't know, just being able to notice those things. I guess if you're not looking for it, I guess you don't notice, or you don't want to notice, right? I mean, like you're saying, I think that's so true. Wow. And so that was just say so when you were like growing up, I mean, well, after high school, where were you going? Like what you went to, where'd you go after high school?
So, like I said, school was my safe haven. So I did really well academically, and I took classes at the community college. So the reason that I ended up going to college was because there were programs such as like Upper Bound, and I met one of my teachers who I'm still in contact with, and his name was Mr. Garcia. He was my math teacher at the community college. And so he wrote my letters of recommendation to get into UCLA. And I actually was able to pay for UCLA with a bunch of scholarships. My first year, I paid out of state fees. I ended up paying the out of state fees because, again, they didn't know what to do with me. So I ended
Yeah.
up at UCLA. I got a degree in sociology and Chicano studies because I didn't grow up with Latinos. I wanted to know my history. And sociology because I've always been interested in providing therapy and healing because I grew up in such a chaotic household. You know, there was never any stability. Like, um, I was working by the age of 10. I would go clean offices and I'd clean houses and I'd do that kind of stuff so that we could survive. And so I always wanted to be that healing person. And so I wanted to be a therapist always. Like I
Yeah.
always wanted to do that. So at
Yeah.
UCLA, I took sociology and studied people, and I did really well there, and I enjoyed my time there. But I I feel like a lot of us first generation, we struggle with, and I don't know if you're first generation. I never asked actually.
No, I'm like third, fourth.
Um,
But I'm first college though.
college.
First one
No,
to
I
graduate
mean
from
first
college.
generation to go to college.
Oh yeah, no, I'm the
Generation to
first
go to
one.
college, we fear losing our scholarships all the time, you know?
Mm,
So we don't get to do, all the activities that other people, have because, their parents already got to travel through Europe and do all of that. And so their kids, they're paying for their education. I remember one of my roommates during the summer was like, hey, I'm going to be taking off. And I was like, oh, where are you going? She's like, Greece for the weekend. And I was like, hmm, okay. And it
wow.
was like not even a big deal. Like it wasn't, her mom was taking off for a work thing and she was just going to take off with her and not worry about homework or studying or anything else because she had a private tutor and all of that. And I'm like, as a first generation college student, I had to go to the resource center, and I took advantage because I didn't want to lose my scholarships or that meant that I couldn't continue another year.
Yeah.
So things like that, that I see that there's so many differences between kids that grow up low income and even like when you're an adult and you can support yourself, there's still those like I guess I would say structural things that keep you down, because I
Yeah.
had to work a full-time job as an undergrad, so I didn't get to do the internships that were going to set you up for life, so it's
And
difficult.
yeah, no, absolutely. And those I think those challenges I think we're kind of a little more aware of, I think recently over the past maybe like decade. But I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about, like as as somebody that's first generation going to college, is kind of breaking our like family ceiling, I guess, or just setting a different path than our family. And so a lot of times of like like my family was mostly my dad was a truck driver, my mom was a dental assistant. They didn't go to college, but they really understand the kind of like the commitment it is to go to college. How was that for you? I mean, being able from coming from a household that you came into to actually wanting to go to college, because I think that's a story all
Yeah.
its own.
So I grew up in a very traditional household. As chaotic as it was very traditional. My dad was very like machista, you know. He didn't provide, but he still had to be like the king and commander of the household. Whatever he said was it. He could have been gone for a few months because he was in jail, but when he came back, like it was his rules, and we knew it, despite what he was doing and everything else, like we still had that fear of him. I won't say respect because it wasn't respect. It was more obedience out of fear, that he would like punish us or something like that, and it really was like fearful of what he could do, to us and or to my mom, dealing with domestic violence and everything else. And I know people are like, oh my God, I can't believe she's saying that. But I'm very transparent about the things that I overcame because I want kids to know that despite where you grew up or what you were raised in or the things that you witnessed or experienced, that you can make it to where you want to be. Like you don't get to control the cards that you're dealt, but you can decide how you want to play those cards, you know? And
Yeah.
so my dad, super traditional, um, if you were a female, you had to cook and clean and iron and that was your role. And ironically, my mom was the one working, but her money was going to him. Like I said, when he was around, he would spend everything. And so he didn't think that I was going to go to college. He didn't want me to go to college because I would get ideas. And kind of funny.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that a lot of traditional like Mexican men are the same. Like their women need to not be educated because then they're going to realize that there's more out there for them and they're going to be able to earn more money, and that can mean like an escape, right? And so for my dad, when I was doing well in school, I know that he worried. Like I know that he saw it as me being rebellious, you know, it was always him trying to put obstacles when I was trying to study, or when I was doing internships, even though I was working full-time as a high school student too. He was always like, ¿Por qué andas en la calle? And I was like, I'm at a clinic doing volunteer work. And for him, it was like, no, andas en la calle, you know, and would put me down because of things like that while I was doing community service, you know, or I was attending classes on a Saturday at the community college, and it was like, nunca estás en la casa. And it's like, no, Dad, one, it's not safe for me to be here. And two, I'm trying to get these college classes so that my education will be cheaper, you know? And so for me, going to UCLA, like I actually had to run away to get to UCLA.
Tell me a little bit about that. I mean,
Yeah,
I think some people can't, especially the people that don't understand the culture, are like, what are you talking about? You have to
yeah,
run away, go to college. But I think this is gonna, a lot of people that come from the common background are gonna really understand these unique challenges that you're talking about. So tell us about that.
yeah. I actually had a friend, and her dad was friends with my dad. So she was living under certain similar circumstances. And her dad actually offered to buy her a car if she didn't go to college. And knowing that they were
Wow.
really poor too, she took that chance. And her dad did that because if she went to college, he was afraid she was going to get pregnant and meet somebody. Um, and so he bought her a car in our senior year.
Wow.
She ended up pregnant that year. So I was like, you know, my dad was like, if you go away, you're going to end up pregnant. And I knew that if I went away, that I would actually have a chance in life, you know? And so I had an older brother that he was my role model, my male role model, you know? He made sure that we went to school. He made sure that our homework was done. He made sure that we were fed. He would actually take things from lunch to bring home to us so that we had something. And he would sit there making sure that I learned to read and all of that. So I actually dedicated my degrees to him because I do owe him everything. But my dad was like, "You're not leaving," and I was really scared that he would stop me. So I packed one bag, and my brother said, "No, you're going, and I'm gonna make sure you get there." And my dad was like, "You're not gonna go." So we actually had to sneak away, and my brother drove me to me running away to UCLA and making sure that I had just the bare necessities in one bag. And even though he grew up watching my dad's mentality, he was like, "No, you have to make it out. You know, you have to make it out for us." And so he helped me run away to college. Like he made sure that I was safe. He made sure that I got out, that my dad didn't find us at night. And yeah, I've never moved home since then, actually. So I left home when I was 16, 17, around there, and have never been back. I'm still here in Southern California by choice now.
Yeah.
Because my dad actually, I'm happy to report my dad is no longer an addict, and we have an excellent relationship now. He's grown a lot because he knew that I was trying to get an education, and it resulted in a lot of great things for our entire family, you know.
Oh, I got two questions for you. Because that's wow. So one is, how did you get that mentality? Because I know that that could be such a barrier for a lot of people, let alone women. I mean, I know, just how were you able to get that mindset of like, I'm gonna do this regardless? Like, where does that come from? Because that's a big, you know, either I'm going or I'm not. You have like those two paths, and especially the one that hasn't been, you know, done before, you know. So how were you able to, what was your thought process with that?
I was the first in my family to go to college out of six of us. So I knew that to break the cycle of poverty that we were in, there was, you know, two things that you could do, right? One was going to land you in prison where my dad was already at, and the other was going to give me a degree. And so both are equally, sorry, excuse me, both are equally as scary. And as a female, you know, to come to LA when you see it on TV and, you know, you grow up looking at the riots and things like that, and you know what's going down, and you're in a small town. It's scary, but it's less scary than staying where I was. You know, it was less scary than my dad.
Yeah.
Um, and when I landed in LA, I didn't have a single person here. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any family. I didn't even know how to get to campus. I actually took a bus, and I asked the bus driver, how do I get to UCLA? So it was a public bus, and he just looked at me kind of ridiculous because I had one bag, and he was like, "Are you a student there?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna be, you know." So I had never seen the campus before, and but I knew that, like I said, it was safer for me to run away to an unknown place without anybody knowing anybody than to remain where I was, because I knew that if I didn't get out, I would be there forever, and there would be no way out. So I took that chance, you know.
You just had to have faith and just I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah, like kind of like the analogy of the bird, you know, it just trusts its wings. It could sit on the thinnest branch, but it knows that if it breaks, it can fly. It was the same, you know. I had overcome so many obstacles already, like, you know, growing up homeless, alcoholism, addiction, like domestic violence, worrying about being deported every day. And it's like, if I overcame all of that, I can handle 4 years and get a degree. You know, like I can do it. And there's a lot of undergrads that, you know, are homeless and are living like in the common areas and in dorm room, like in study areas and things like that. And it's like the sacrifices that you have to take sometimes, and you have to be fully committed and know that this is what you really want and put your entire heart into it. And if you fail, you just get back up and you keep going, because you've overcome way more to get to where you are now. And statistically, you've overcome way more just to be where you're at, that you can't give up, you know? And I felt like my siblings' dreams were also riding on it. Like, if I can make it, if I can survive, then they know that they could too. And they did. So it was just that idea of, I need to make it for us, like get out. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you just have like four or five stories right there that I want to go into, but I'm trying to stay on topic. But like, wow, that's incredible. and and even a bigger, I don't know if it's bigger or the same or what, but you just give us a snapshot of kind of your life, but also how you're able to forgive your dad. Like
Mhm.
that's because that can go into a really dark and ugly place,
Yeah.
like really, really ugly. How were you able to do that? To kind of like
You
be in a
know,
good place?
for me, understanding that my dad didn't grow up with a father was where it all started. And I knew that he never had love from a parent either. And he didn't know how to be a dad. He didn't have role models himself, you know, and I'm not making excuses for him. It's more of an understanding as individuals that if you don't have those modeling, and you never have a role model or anybody to teach you what love is or what it should be, that you're never going to be able to do it appropriately, you know. And that if you're under stress, like from poverty, or you're dealing with addiction, then your mentality is always going to be, you do something wrong, let me yell at you, let me hit you, let me, you know, get out of here, let me throw this or let me throw that. And you think that you can get people to behave out of intimidation. You know, that's how you show your manhood. And so understanding those things, I think, is what allowed me to forgive my dad, because I understood him more as a person, that he could be a better father if he knew where those feelings were coming from, you know? And once we started having a better financial outcome, my dad's anger kind of dissipated, you know, because he was no longer angry at himself because he couldn't provide for the family. Like he started feeling like with more stability came less outbursts and less dependency on alcohol, because he didn't need to forget anymore that we were living in this situation, you know. And he left alcohol once we had a stable home, and you know, we were able to provide and all of that. So it really came from understanding, like, why this person acts this way. And I feel like if men are turning to anger and things like that and are explosive, that there's still a way to change that, you know, when you change other circumstances and you understand where it's really coming from, that it's more of a reaction and not necessarily the person that you are, that you have the ability to change that. And so I forgave my dad because I finally understood him, you know, and I understood like where he was coming from. You know, he came to this country, he didn't know the language, you know, he was being mistreated, working in the fields, he was exhausted and working like 14-hour days and still not making it, you know, like
Yeah.
still trying to survive and still looking at your kids and not being able to feed them. Like I would be angry too, you know, I'd feel incompetent. I would feel, you know, resentful. I would, you know, just as an immigrant or as a man, I would feel like, what am I doing? You know, like I'm supposed to be the provider and I'm not. So I feel like I fall short, you know? Um, and now that we've grown up, my dad is the most amazing grandpa in the world. Like my dad is I mean, I wish I could have had him as a grandpa. He
Yeah.
goes back to school nights, he goes to graduation, he, you know, goes to face painting with the kids. He's there for them, he reads with them. He's
Wow.
really supportive, like things that he never did with us as kids, he's doing with my nephews and my nieces, you know, and he's there at their, like I said, like their most insignificant events, like the turkey trot. He's there
Yeah.
taking them on, you know, football games like for them and trainings and stuff. He's there cheering them on so proudly, you know, and those are things that he missed out on for us, but that he's experiencing with our nieces and nephews. And because we showed him, you know, like the forgiveness, and because we provide for him, and because he has that stability, he's a lot less angry and resentful, you know, and he
Yeah.
feels nurtured and he feels like this is my family, you know, they're not going to leave me. And so I think that because of that support too, he was able to also get the mental health that he needed, you
Yeah.
know. He started talking to people about it, and when I became a therapist, like now, he'll be at the store and be like, oh, mija te puedo ayudar, like, you know, she can do this. And I'll get a random phone call and they'll be like, oh, my child this. And then I'm like, I can't provide therapy for you on the phone. I'm so sorry. But my dad loves to like try to help people now because, you know, he remembers how difficult it was, you know, and overcoming addiction and overcoming all of the things that he does, you know. And I feel like the immigrant population, especially with men, they are dealing with the trauma of crossing the border. They are dealing with being belittled by employers because they don't speak the language. And even like with the community, they're not welcomed all the time. And if you're not welcome, like you're gonna feel that anger and that resentment. So I totally understand where it's coming from. But we can change all of that, you know, by being able to empower ourselves, you know. And so I feel
Yeah.
like my dad was, you know, the macho of the house, but I feel like because of that, like the things that he taught me, I think I was even more stubborn than he was, and I beat him out on that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
So what advice would you give somebody that's going through the same kind of situation that you were going through?
um, again, that things can be difficult, you know, things will be difficult, but building on that resiliency and remembering the things that you've already overcome is, I think, the most important thing, because we like to reflect on the negative, but you don't remember the positive that came out of it, you know. Like I know now that if I were to lose my job, I hope I don't, but if I do, I am not above cleaning houses, you know. I did it
Yeah.
as a kid, I could do it again in a heartbeat, you know. I'm a master's level, like I am a counselor, I'm a therapist, but I can turn around and work at Target because I need to survive, you
Yeah.
know. And that's one of the things that I learned, to be humble because of where I came from. And dealing with like alcoholism and all of that, yeah, it was really difficult. But now, because of those things, I can deal with people that are actually dealing with those issues now. And I can identify it in my students. And that's a huge positive thing because I can provide therapy for them. And, you know, I live hundreds of miles away from my family. And that's hard because I miss them every day. But at the same time, the positive to that is I know that this is a less toxic environment for me, and I can survive and I can thrive in this area. So it's really reflecting on, yeah, there's negative experiences, and you might have hardships in your life, but take the positive out of those things. Like, how did you grow from those things? Like, how did you become the person that you are right now, and gather that strength so you can keep going another day, and keep building on the person that you are. Because I always feel like you're never done growing. If I have another opportunity to learn, I'll take it. If I can continue to grow as an individual, or I can give back to the community, I will, because I don't want anyone else to experience the same things that I did growing up. And I think that that's how society should be. Instead of saying, well, I had it this hard, you should have it that hard to get to where you are. It's more of a, I had it this hard, let me open the door so you can also enter and not have it as hard as I did. And remembering that it took you so long to get to where you are, but now you have experience, and it's not going to take you as long to get to the next step. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of why I started this, was to have these type of conversations of, I think now society's telling us of like how bad we have it and how hard it is. And it's true. It's really hard. Whatever your situation is, if you're a certain age, you've been through something, you know, but we have to kind of think of it of like, hey, how am I gonna grow from this? And I just remember telling myself in hard situations is like, you know what, stress equals growth. That's all I had to tell myself over and over again. That's what I would tell myself. But yeah, absolutely. And gosh, thank you for your time. I think we're gonna have to do this again, and we might have to take different sections of your life, because it's so true. If once you have overcome so much, it's like, well, what, you know, am I gonna end back here? That's fine. I was there before. So yeah, absolutely. God, thank you so much for sharing your story, and we're gonna have to do this again, somehow, some way. But thank you.
No, thanks for having me.